would be in existence. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the proponent would yield for a question.
I'm sure he would.
We have we're being asked to vote for a luxury tax, and the size of that luxury tax may be in a bit dispute, but it clearly affects a number of industries and employers in Connecticut. And I want to ask you if my interpretation of this bill is correct. That it's my interpretation that an employer could not require its employees to come to a meeting to discuss the effect of the luxury tax on that particular business. Is that interpretation correct? As far as your opinion?
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert. I would say that my reading of the bill indicates that if the meeting is convened with the primary purpose being to discuss their opinion about something of a political nature, then no, they cannot do that. Having said that, I think it could be looked at as discussing the impact on the industry and I guess parsed out as something separate than that. But I'm not an expert, and perhaps someone else could speak to that better than I could.
I would only add, I think that it in part depends upon whether the employees would be required and mandated to attend such a meeting or discussion. Representative Barham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to reiterate a point that Representative Holder-Winfield made, that my reading of the bill is that it merely prohibits an employer from mandating attendance at such a meeting. It doesn't prohibit the employer from convening a meeting, advertising the meeting, encouraging people to attend it, and then leaving it up to the individual discretion of the employee whether they feel comfortable. It also goes on to indicate that the primary purpose is to communicate the employer's opinion concerning a religious or political matter. So, you know, in my mind, if the meeting is not for the purpose of primarily conveying an opinion of the employer, but perhaps more of an educational forum to let people know what the issue is or how they can get involved, that might also be acceptable under this. So I think that the main purpose of this bill is to prevent an employee from being intimidated to having to attend such a meeting or having some retaliatory conduct asserted against them because they refuse to attend such a meeting. And to me, if you look at the way the bill is written, it seems very reasonable in those respects. It accomplishes those goals without requiring any punitive action against employees who just don't want to participate.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Vice Chair of the committee, or whoever would like to answer.
Representative Holder-Winfield.
She's got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I distracted you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. I know this is yet another bill that we've been through many years and many hours, but just for some clarification, I know I've heard today that and before that the purported intent of this bill is to stop intimidation and employees feeling intimidated by these mandatory meetings. I guess that word intimidation confuses me a little bit, because if a meeting's required, I would presume that the word explicitly required would have to be put out there, correct? We would have to say this is a required meeting. Through you.
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I think that in order for it to actually be required, that would be true, but I think there are cases that we can all think of where it's not stated that the meeting is required, but when repercussions come from not attending the meeting, it's quite obvious the meeting was required. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you, so it may say required or it may not, but there may be repercussions or there may not be. So I would assume we're talking about maybe being fired or, I mean, what other repercussions would we be talking about through you?
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Again, I'm not an expert, but if I were to think about it, there are evaluative processes that are in place in most workplaces, and if it affected that, I think that could be another form of reprisal.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In line 22, we talk about the primary purpose of the meeting, and I know, once again, this is a question we've discussed at length, but how do we define what the primary purpose is through you?
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm getting to your line. I'm not quite sure exactly how we define the primary purpose. It could, if the meeting is called to talk about the opinion of the employer with respect to something that is of a political nature, then I would say that that's the primary purpose. And I would also say, and again, I'm not an expert, but I would also say if the meeting is called for a number of topics, but when the meeting begins, the primary thing discussed within a meeting is something of a political nature and reflects the employer's opinion, it would become apparent at that point that that was what that meeting was really about.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, okay, so if there was a meeting that lasted an hour, and would it have to be 31 minutes of that meeting to consider a primary purpose of political or religious conversation, or if it were 30 minutes, would that still be considered a primary purpose through you?
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer to that question. Again, I think that the purpose of this bill is that an employee is not required, and some of this would have to do with the employee's interpretation, obviously, but an employee is not required. Again, it doesn't prevent the meeting from happening, and that's the best answer I can give you, Representative Klarides.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line 16, Section 6, we talk about, we define political matters, and that includes political party affiliation or a decision to join or not join any lawful political, social, or community group or activity or any labor organization. So if in part of a meeting that an employer had with his employees, there was a conversation at some point which was political in nature, say about, I don't even know what, maybe talking about what's going on in the world today. There was no intention to direct somebody for or against or anything else. There was a conversation about it. Would that be considered political in nature and therefore not allowed under this bill? Through you.
Representative Holder-Winfield.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I would imagine that it would be considered political in nature. However, I don't think it would be prohibited under this bill, as the bill speaks of those meetings which the primary purpose of which is to convey the opinion of the employer. So if it happens to happen during the meeting, it does not reach that triggering effect. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Klarides.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if in that meeting, at some point during the meeting, for the 31 minutes of the 60-minute meeting, a conversation was had about the state of our economy, let's just say today nationally, and there were discussions about the president, there were discussions about Republicans and Democrats alike, there was just a general discussion